It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello, my name is... Wait, that's not how this podcast starts. Do you want to start this one?
Hello, welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. I'm Alexis.
I'm Isaac.
And today we are talking about The Scorpion Rules by Aaron Bow. Isaac, do you want to do the plot or shall I?
Okay, I'll give it a shot. Greta is one of a number of children of rulers in a post-apocalyptic, post-climate disaster Earth that is being run by a sentient AI named Talus, who is capable of nuking people from orbit if they disagree with him. He has taken all of these children of important people hostage in an effort to stop there from being war anymore, because he needs a planet to keep living on. And so in sort of a medieval way, society here is kind of medieval, despite the fact that its technology is firmly regulated. He has all of these royal hostages that he will kill if their parents decide to go to war with each other. And so we get a little sort of insight into how this works, and then I skipped ahead and spoiled a bunch of stuff, so Alexis took over the job.
This boy shows up who is not raised as royalty and is trying to disrupt the entire social system, and this is causing the children to be collectively punished.
Oh, you're absolutely right. That is like the first disruptive element.
Right, but also causing all of these kids to, rethink the system that they've bought into.
Well, do you have any other questions for me?
Okay, are there wizards?
There's an AI god.
Yeah, Talus is basically a wizard. Are there lesbians?
Yes.
Or at least certainly bisexuals.
They are certainly bisexual, yes.
Do they fight?
Yes, they do.
Yes, so it's complicated. Mm-hmm. Great. So this is actually a classic Wizards versus Lesbians. This book is from 2015?
It is from 2015. It's an early Wizards versus Lesbians.
This is actually an early Wizards versus Lesbians. And I gotta say, when I read this book, it was, Wizards versus Lesbians and lesbians in speculative fiction, particularly YA, which this is, were still sufficiently rare that I was somewhat surprised that she turned out to be bisexual and into a woman. It's because, you've got your sort of classic YA love triangle going on here, but it's between, with Greta and one boy and one girl, and the fact that the plot even sets that up and makes her end up with the girl came as a genuine surprise to me back in 2016 when I read this. And these days I'm like, wow, okay, no, actually it was entirely foreshadowed and super obvious.
It is kind of remarkable how quickly that changed over the last 10 years or so, 10 to 20 years.
Yeah, revisiting this book 8 years after I first read it, 8 years almost to the day, actually. It sure was an experience.
But I do remember like the era when you saw lesbians in your media, you would like pog, and by you I mean me, and point and do the sort of Sojak face about it.
Right, particularly because, this is very much a post-Hunger Games YA novel. It's a dystopian YA. It's got a love triangle. It's got your plucky girl heroine.
Yeah, this feels very much like a sort of transition state. It's not quite fish nor fowl. And that sort of is reflected in the way that it doesn't quite hold together. But we can talk about that.
Yeah. So why should you read this, other than the fact that it does in fact have lesbians?
I think it's very good. I think it's very well written. I think that it's quite morally complex, which is more so than a lot of things that followed it.
Yeah.
And that has its positives and its negatives, but mostly I would say if you're like waiting for the fourth ninth house book to come out, go back and read this, because it has a remarkable amount in common with the ninth house books.
It does, despite predating them
in theme and plot, if not in tone.
Yeah. Well, actually, in some ways, tone too, in that there's a lot of creeping dread, and Talus is very much like Jod.
Yes, it's less funny, I guess.
That's true.
But
It's less
but
funny.
it's not funny. There are some good jokes, most of which involve goats.
Yes, and I mean also, and part of honestly why it's less funny is that it is there. This book is very good at sort of building creeping dread. It hangs over the book, and actually, in a weird way, this reminded me a little bit of Girls of Paper and Fire, in that there's a sort of creeping dread that hangs over the book, and then it doesn't follow through with exactly the thing that it's promised will happen. So it's not like Girls of Paper and Fire in that way, but really awful things happen to our protagonist and other named characters.
Yes, if I were to go through the dreary ritual of comping this, I would say Gideon the Ninth and Girls of Paper and Fire. I had the same thought.
Yeah, and the Hunger Games, the
Hunger Games, yes.
So
it sort of hails from an era where the Hunger Games almost goes without saying.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting book. It's it's YA, so it's fairly short. Actually, I don't know if YA tends to be that short, but at least it's not a doorstopper. And it's got a lot of interesting things going on. So why shouldn't you read this book?
I think that a lot of very bad people get off too lightly.
Absolutely.
I think that it kind of falls for its own propaganda in some ways, and also, even though it's not as much of a problem as it initially seems to be, I think that we could do with a moratorium on evil AI overlords forever, for reasons which I'll get into in the spoiler zone.
So to give this book, a break again, this book is 9 years old.
Yes,
and so it was a slightly different climate. Also, I think, it is morally complex. However, the world it sets up doesn't really hold together when you poke at it. It is not politically complex. And I think that I can imagine somebody reading it and mistaking the two. So don't read this book if you're looking for smart politics, because the politics of the book are kind of stupid. But
yeah, it's mostly about interpersonal stuff.
Yes.
And it's also mostly about how the school resembles the prison, which is also a theme of Hunger Games and various other books like this. I've said this on the podcast multiple times, but I don't think I've ever cited my source, which is Foucault, Discipline and Punish. Is it surprising that prisons resemble factories, schools, barracks, and hospitals, which all in turn resemble prisons? This sticks with me 'cause I wonder how many of us were thoroughly traumatized and remade by our school experiences. I certainly was. And what do they want to make me into? And how can I make myself into something else?
So I also have to say that this book made me wonder if this is just a commentary on the British Empire, which raised all of its children by just horrifically abusing them in boarding schools.
Also a thought that occurred to me, yes.
That, this is what you do with the children of elites. But anyway, it's got some interesting takes on trauma in particular that I don't think entirely hold together, but are at least interesting.
Yeah, and we can get into the nuance of that in a little bit.
All right, so content. So any other reasons why you shouldn't read the book?
No, I think it's pretty good other than that. Although, as you say, it is, there's a lot of dread, pain, anger, and fear in it. But I don't think it drags despite that, which is a trick that not all books manage to pull off, as we've discussed.
Yeah, it's true. So content warnings. Torture. Murder of children.
Yes. Brainwashing.
Brainwashing.
Yeah, I mean, kidnapping,
those are the big
obviously.
Ones. Yeah, kidnapping, collective punishment. Bad moms, not necessarily bad rulers, but bad moms.
Yeah. Although it sort of gives it a what can you do. And
not become the ruler, clearly.
Yes.
So, no, actually, I want to get into that too, post-spoiler zone.
Yeah. So yeah, but yeah, I think that's about it. There is not a whole lot in the way of like racism, sexism, or sexual assault.
There is some casual, accidental racism on the part of the author, particularly in the portrayal of the Chinese love interest.
Yes, although I think is she meant to be Chinese or is she meant to be like Tibetan,
Well,
Central Asian?
her name is written in pinyin, and she's from Yunnan. So I assume that this is part of the problem, right? Is that
Right.
it can't really tell if she's supposed to be, Chinese or Tibetan. Though, to be fair to the author, if you project, 300 years in the future, um, you know, if the current settlement and general genocide of Chinese minorities in the West continues, Tibet will be mostly ethnically Chinese. But just there's some things about her portrayal that don't quite sit right with me.
Yes.
Even though I really like her as a character.
Yeah. Making up entirely new world religions that are going to sink in within like a few centuries. But anyway, yes. Shall we go on to discuss the bits that want discussing, though?
Yeah.
Spoiler zone. I think that the best thing that this book does for me is that it really gives you a lot of different things to sympathize with. It is really good at presenting different interests and different people who feel righteous about what they're doing, even though what they're doing is also incredibly brutal and cruel on a small scale.
And in Talus's case, on a large scale.
Yes, or on a large scale, and makes you think about what that means and why, and what being brutalized does to you, and so on. And but I don't think that it doesn't resolve these questions in the same way that that I would like to, if I were in charge of this, but I think that the abbot gets off far too easily. I think that by the time he dies, he's just such a cuddly old man figure, despite
sort of, except that Greta occasionally sort of checks in with herself and goes, "I love this man. I'm so sad that he's died. This AI man. I'm so sad that he's dying. But he did torture me throughout my entire childhood, including just recently."
Implicitly and explicitly, yes.
Right, including, and you get the moment. This is where I think that the book is being fairly smart, because it's told in first person, and so, to really convey how much Greta has bought into, the logic of her abusers, you have to show this, and that means depicting them very sympathetically, but at the same time, I think that, there's the moment where the abbot is, kindly, gently, with sorrow, saying, "Look, I just want to help you. I'm just, can I just give you the sleep dream medication, this time just to sleep, just for your insomnia?" And not 3 days earlier, he had been torturing her with this exact same medication, and he's still just offering it to her. And, she flinches back horribly. Yes. So I think the book does not let the abbot off quite as much as I think that the author could have maybe hit us over the head a little bit more with it, but she really is, I think, delivering the idea that, yes, of course, Greta is sympathetic to this being. It basically has been her parent for the last, since she was 5, and now she's 17, 16? 16. But whenever you get a moment to step outside of the emotional logic between the two of them, you go, "Oh wow, everything he's doing is horrifying."
She also explicitly points this out when it's happening to people other than her.
Right, exactly, which is a really nice touch.
Yeah, Alien is looking to his torturer for reassurance, she says.
Right, she says, looking to her torturer for reassurance.
Yes, which is good, although I don't know, maybe you're right about how the degree of it, whether it should be more or less explicit. I mean, it is YA. When she says Alien is looking to his torturer for reassurance, this is also both a good character moment for her, and the fact that she is still essentially disassociated from a lot of this, and also a yes, I could have made that conclusion book, thank you, sort of moment.
Yeah, Yeah, sort of moment, except that again, the you know, it's if they cut that moment, then it really is letting the abbot off too lightly.
It is. It is. It's sort of, and I was going to say to what you said earlier, there's a lot of like little moments like that where it's like, okay, this is a sentence and you're not, it's more told than shown. But also every, like, this is also so compressed. It like takes place over the course of, the crisis takes place over the course of like a week.
Yeah.
And so, you're not going to get a person like able to fully reckon with this, within that time period.
Yes.
And
also, Greta's kind of autistic coded, and she's definitely doing the thing where she just explains her emotions because, she's not sure that you, the listener, is going to understand her emotions unless she tells you exactly they are in words, which I found both relatable and also that was a fairly consistent character voice.
I actually wanted to talk about that a little bit in relation to the very, very end of the book, which is my least favorite part of the book. So in short, the deal that Greta strikes with God, with Talus, is that he's lonely because the other AIs keep dying off. So she'll allow herself to be made into an AI, and all the AIs are just human brains that have been, recorded and resequenced, basically. If she allows you, she will let him turn her into an AI if he lets her friends go, basically. And this is
friends and like the city of Pittsburgh.
And the city of Pittsburgh, or whatever. In one of the amusing moments, he keeps forgetting which city he's threatened to explode.
He starts off by nuking Indianapolis, and then he can't decide if he's going to do Pittsburgh or Columbus, and he keeps mixing them up.
Yes. Now, I think we could probably afford to lose Indianapolis, but that's still a lot of deaths. Anyway.
This is exactly what he says in the prologue about Fresno.
Well, some cities, man. But then again, people would usually include Cleveland on this list, and I'm a staunch defender of Cleveland. So
indeed, and Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh's nice.
My one experience in Indianapolis wasn't very pleasant, so...
Indiana's a tough one. Indiana's just tough. But
anyway, the point is that, there's a thing, right, where we should talk about Talus soon, but I want to finish your thought.
Yes, but so, and this is, and part of, and I really like all the concept that's going into this, because initially I was like, oh God, it's an AI, and the reason that I'm going to object to AI, overlords, it's, despite the fact that it's allowed this generation of hucksters to continue to string people along until they were able to hop back on the Bitcoin train when Trump got elected, is that I think that it's very important in all of these stories to remember that the dictator is just a dude who can be killed and is just one body. And I think that, it's easy to forget that. And I don't like it when it's reinforced that it's some sort of like immortal monster god thing instead of just a guy.
I don't know. I feel like it works fairly well with Talus because on the one hand, he's so obviously just a guy. He's an immortal monster god thing, but he's so obviously just a guy. And, he doesn't, yes, he can like hop between bodies, but it is clear that the AIs can be killed. But also, it's not necessarily clear that... even if you take out Talus, you've got this entire system that you would have to dismantle.
Yes. As the book goes on, I got less and less angry about that, or less and less dissatisfied about that for exactly this reason. And also because it was revealed that all of these AIs are just guys who have been uploaded. Yeah. And they're exactly the kind of guys who would be uploaded too, which is an astute observation. I mean,
right? Talus is absolutely the kind of guy who would sign up to be uploaded. An
annoying Gen X Silicon Valley nerd. Who keeps making Star Trek references. Actually, I understood almost immediately that this was true because Talus makes a Star Wars reference in his utterances, very near the beginning of the book, and I was like, okay,
right.
It's a Star Trek reference, actually, nerd. But I keep getting away from the point that I'm trying to make.
So about AIs.
About AIs, so. A lot of really good stuff about what is a personality? What is being uploaded mean? Because this book understands in a way that I really appreciate that that the human mind is a lot of voices shouting, and if you knock that balance, it's very hard to keep the illusion that there's a unitary self, alive.
Yes.
Which is also, something that an autistic person like Greta would understand, because one thing about autistic people is that we have a harder time with that. And
yes, which also, and it's interesting because part of the way that AIs work is that because they're not human, they kind of have lost the ability to pretend to have a self.
Yes.
Which is which works well, which is an interesting, I'm going to say, I don't know whether or not it works well. It is a really interesting comment on, PTSD and dissociative identity disorder and, all the ways in which PTSD can fuck with your sense of self.
Yes. And like, if that was all sort of implication and, we're sort of trying to figure out, and we're being laid down all the speculative stuff, that's great. But I didn't really like the fact that it went ahead and showed what Greta is like after she has been unwound. Largely because it kind of just averages out to, oh, she's been hit by the laser that makes you autistic-er.
Yeah, but only for the first couple days. Like, then she has her moment where, she turns back into, she's able to sort of fake having a self again.
Yeah, but I think the execution left something to be desired.
I agree.
She forgets how to use contractions, which is
she never uses contractions. That's part of her personality. Like, she doesn't use contractions throughout the entire book. Elion makes fun of her for it. At one point, he's like, "We can teach each other. I'll teach you how to use contractions."
Oh, that's a good point. I guess I really noticed it when she was like hamming up the emotionless thing, post laser surgery.
Right, but no, that's part of her general thing, throughout.
Yeah, I guess that I reacted negatively to it, I think largely because it felt like it was leaning into a stereotype. But also it's, the author's dead and all, but this author has dealt with like having a brain tumor. And like it clearly felt like there was some real personal experience of depersonalization in here.
Right, and like that it really does feel like the author is herself asking what parts of us make us human, what much can you mess with the way our brains function and still have us be ourselves? Is there a self?
Right.
It feels more like the author's asking questions and that the author has a definite answer that she wants to sell us on.
Indeed. I guess maybe there's a lot of things in this book that are like, do I not like this because it's not good, or do I not like this because it's viscerally upsetting to me personally in a way that's,
yes.
And I think that last part of the book, like the way that Dacia, or Dazia, as we will get to talking about, like immediately rejects her. And it's like, oh, you're not you. But I'm like, I am. This is still the same person. It's just mixed slightly differently right now.
Right. And specifically that, she's... Because it's all like she also just went through an incredibly traumatic experience. She's also just like horribly dissociating on several levels. And of course and then so it feels very real that her girlfriend's going to freak out and run away and reject her.
Mm-hmm. Now that you mentioned the autism thing, like it feels almost that this group of, princes, princesses, godlets, and so on are just different kinds of autistic. And I can't believe that this didn't occur to me until now, because they so totally are.
Right. You have like almost nonverbal autistic, and you have like cannot pick up social subtleties autistic. And
yeah. No, these are all parts of Greta's brain that she's externalized. And the catalyst is irredeemably oppositional defiant autistic in Alien.
Right.
Like, just will absolutely not get along no matter what and under any circumstances, which is the real revolutionary moment. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Just being too much of a brat to accept any kind of orders.
Well, also, I mean, he shows up and he's the one kid who comes from a loving family.
There is that, yes.
Like, every single one of these kids, almost all of them have been, because almost all of them are from hereditary monarchies. So most of them get sent to the school pretty young when their parents take over, ascend to their thrones or whatever. And even the ones who show up fairly late are being raised by people, knowing that they're going to die. And Elian is from, this family that broke away from the political branch, and then he basically gets kidnapped by his grandmother so that she could become generalissimo of Mississippi and the Midwest.
Yes. Of Appalachia, really, and the Rust Belt.
It's Appalachia, the Rust Belt, and also I think some of the Deep South. But
they all have sort of real classics, Kentucky accents.
Well, Elian,
which he turns up and turns down as is appropriate.
Yes, but he's the one kid who isn't coming with horrible PTSD, and he hasn't been horribly abused, and he hasn't been raised to know that he may well be thrown away and killed. And so some of it's oppositional defiant disorder, but some of it is just not having had his spirit crushed.
Yes, I suppose there is that.
Some of it is just the sense that he deserves better than to be tortured.
Yeah, no, he expects to be treated like a human being, which is anathema to the system.
Yes, and he would rather, endure a wide variety of electrical shocks
right.
than not be, than be treated the way that everyone else is treated. And because he's capable of mostly reining it in, because he does so as soon as the kids inform him that actually the school uses collective punishment.
Yeah, I think, the fact that I'm looking at this and my second note says I will want to talk about the British boarding school system and the Empire is very related to that, because the boarding school system is designed to teach you to follow orders, and to put that in you to such a depth that it's and to basically, undermine your sense of self-worth to the point where you really do believe that the Empire and the king are everything. And it seems to have worked pretty well. Just, here, Japan also did it during their run up to, really trying their imperial hand. It seems like a good system to create people who are willing to die in stupid ways, for the benefit of imperialism.
Yes, this is actually the rare book where I do buy its explanation for why they're hereditary monarchies. Actually, because in a democracy, the amount of people who are willing to run for office who have, first of all, the requirement that you can only take office if you have children under 18 and only hold office as long as you do. And then you have to opt into this. So you're basically looking at 20 and 30-year-olds who are willing to opt into having their children taken away and probably murdered. And this reduces the amount of democracies. It does not eliminate them, because there are still people who are willing to do that. But, it does reduce them, because it's an easier system if you can just pick somebody and raise them up their entire lives to buy into it.
I do have a slight quibble with Talus's, at least, suggested reasoning for why this system works or worked in the medieval system. It obviously didn't work all the time in the medieval system, because most of those nations were at war for most of that period. But
right.
If the hostage exchanging, system between allies, and not to say Japan again, but the hostage taking that was with that the shogunate used on its on the family of its sort of lords, of its far-flung lords. It doesn't work because of love. It works because you need those children to carry on your power, to stop a succession crisis from happening.
Right, and the thing is, I think Talus is obviously wrong about this. I think the book kind of agrees with that, because all of these, it's clear, basically all of the parents are willing to kill their children. They send their children off. They only get 3 visits home per year, and the parents are very sad about it, but the kids don't really see these places, their home palaces as home. And you get the impression that the parents don't entirely see it either, and that, again, that part of the reason why you wouldn't do this, why you wouldn't declare war, is mostly because, among other things, you lose your position of power unless you have another kid you can send.
Right, and the military grandma of the what is it called? The Columbian Alliance, or
the
something?
Cumberland Alliance.
The Cumberland Alliance, right, is you know, expects the monarch parent to act like a human being.
Right.
Because
Right.
she is somewhat far removed from the reality of the situation, also having grown up in a sort of, at least a place that is not as removed from its democratic
Right. You know, a
ideals,
nominal, you
ideas.
know, sort of a series of warlords and nominal democracies.
Right.
Right. And, you know, she does love her grandson enough that you know, that part of her plan is based on she thinks that she can do a commando strike, take over this particular hostage school, torture torture the daughter of the neighboring kingdom, so that the neighboring kingdom's queen will grant some concessions, and then get her grandson out of there. This does not
Yes.
work out very well for her, but you know, even though she almost causes her grandson to die, and she also is perfectly willing to torture someone else's child, she still cares enough about her child in a way that basically no other world ruler does, because she wasn't raised in the system. You know, she got up through a meritocracy.
Right. Which is why, even though this is obviously a desperate move on her part, because she's not willing to allow, you know, a city's worth of her people to it's not starve to death. What is the
It's dehydrate. Yeah,
to
yeah.
dehydrate?
Right.
Yes. Then that she, you know, that she comes up with this cockamamie scheme, and it's clear that, like, the more, you know, established nations of this world have already gotten used to the idea of, you know, throwing away the odd city.
Yeah, and that is the thing that is the thing that I do like about the book, is that you've got this enforced peace with hostages and an AI overlord who can nuke cities at will, and yet you still have war, which I
Yes.
think, you know, you have war, but they are smaller, more managed conflicts, and that works fairly well in a sort of, you know, modeling what conflict under nuclear deterrence looks like.
Indeed.
And except for one major point that is missing, which is why this book is politically very stupid, which is terrorism.
Yes.
Like the lack of terrorism under the system, because of course terrorism is what you do if you know, you're dealing with nuclear powers and you don't have nukes, and if you're a terrorist cell, your kids aren't in the hostage school.
Yeah, and you don't have a city for Talus to vaporize.
Right, exactly. You know, you can be sufficiently decentralized that, okay, fine, they take out the city. That's only going to fuel your terrorist movement. You know, the politics of this book only work well on a metaphorical level, and are quite stupid. But that's fine.
That's mostly what we're trying to do here anyway. Is it's mostly asking the question. Well, okay, Talus is kind of right. You know, within the logic of this world, which, as you say again, is stupid. But we're going to assume that Talus is kind of right and that he actually has managed to do mostly what he has set out to do. Is it worth it?
Right.
How do we feel about these children? I mean, they are incredibly privileged children. It seems like a small price to pay for, you know, a world that continues to exist. But freedom? Question mark. And you know, that's sort of the table stakes here. That's the conflict that we're meant to be thinking about. I am often not certain that I'm using the phrase table stakes correctly. According to brandmarketingblog.com, it means the minimum offer to be considered a viable player, whether you're at the poker table or the boardroom table. Now, why does the boardroom resemble the poker table? Anyway, you can decide whether I was using it right.
And you know, also that, hey, just when you think the system is working, somebody does something and you have to nuke Indianapolis. And by
Yes.
you, I mean Talus. By have to, I mean decides to.
Indeed. So we can talk about Talus a little bit. He's basically John.
Well, John is basically him. That's
John, yeah, and I mean, if, you know, these things are, of course, always, you know, there's always parallel evolution here, and, you know, unconscious what's the word that I want, inspiration, even when there isn't, you know, direct inspiration. Taz's like approach to this kind of immortal, jackass god setup seems more realistic as far as what immortality would actually do to a person, as we discussed in our discussion of the Ninth House books.
Yes.
And also in the moral culpability, thereof to appertaining.
Yes. Although I think that so I only vaguely remember the second book, which I don't recall being very good, but the second book is much harder on Talos. And both in terms of things that happen to him and also, whether or not, he has to deal with a coup, basically, of his own extremely loyal people who are like, no, you've gone off the rails. And so, I both of them are awful. John is more actively manipulative. You sort of, in some ways, sort of John Gaius is sort of the combo of the Abbot and Talos.
I feel like John is a genuinely clever, manipulative sociopath, where Talos is more like a normal nerd with a disk drive attached to him. Yeah. There's the fact that there is also an Abbot in the Ninth House books makes me think okay, how much
does make me wonder
how much down the same line are we actually going here? But
this book, as far as I can tell, despite getting good reviews, didn't seem to make much of a cultural impact. So whether or not Taz, even heard of it, who knows?
Yeah. It's not important. It's not
right.
important. It's just an interesting point of comparison.
Right, but it is interesting also that I feel like this book, if this book had come out 5 years later, it might have made more of a splash.
Yeah, it's you hit the zeitgeist, or you're before your time, or you're after your time. It's hard to deal with sometimes.
I mean, it got plenty of good reviews. I'm sure it did okay, but
but it did not make the cultural impact that the Ninth House books did.
No, well, very few things do. So another interesting thing about Talos that I like, not as a person but as a character, is you get a really great character moment when he shows up, having taken over somebody's body, and now she's going to die in a year or two, and he immediately is like, oh, I can see why the Abbot likes you, Greta, and wants you as a candidate AI, but I like this snarky kid who keeps making dated movie references. I think we should make him an AI.
Yes. There's also some interesting gender stuff going on with
Yes.
Talos. Like the fact that he bothers to bind when he's in a female body, which suggests that even as a sort of immortal AI, he still can feel gender dysphoria.
Yes.
Is just a fascinating little detail.
Well, he's very much a dude, and I think
he's also horny, which is that's part of being in a body, but still, we just add that element of the God Emperor to the mix.
Yes. So, but yeah, no, the fact that he's very much, he is a man who has taken over a woman's body, and it's very clear that he's trying to sort of treat it like a male body, despite the fact that he hasn't been regularly embodied in centuries. How though, all of his messengers apparently have this hardware installed in them so we don't actually know how many times he's had to take one over for one reason or another.
Mm-hmm. No, he picked the woman because she was the closest.
Yes.
But it is sort of interesting, particularly when you compare it with our mainline Wisla's work, because this is another story about. I mean, we're starting to get into the themes that we haven't seen for a while. One of which is, mind sharing.
Mm-hmm.
And one of which is okay, I, the lesbian, am going to take on the power of the wizard now. What does that mean?
Yeah.
How am I going to use this power? Am I going to try to change things for the better while still being an immortal AI dickwad? And even though, she's forced into that position. And so we're very much in that frame right now. And I think that sort of the author heightening the sort of the mixed gender entity that is Talos in this woman's body is That trope sure feels optimistic in retrospect.
Yeah, I think you're right. And like Talus occasionally draws attention to her body, being like, oh, it turns out she's nearsighted.
Yes. Farsighted, actually.
Oh,
She's
farsighted. Okay.
And nightblind.
I remember the nightblind, yes. I remember that she needed glasses.
By the way, I love he's constantly like fiddling with his face and making mouth noises, and like, stimming basically,
right.
Speaking of everybody's autistic.
Yes.
But like the in-universe explanation is like he's not used to being in a body, so he keeps like making all of these unconscious, whoa, I'm in a body, feel my face, what's my my hands, my mouth, sort of stuff. But it also reads perfectly well as a guy who's just coked out of his mind.
Right.
Because he what is he? He's an overclocked brain and he's gonna die. He's just on a lot of uppers, basically, if you want to make the real world comparison.
Yeah. So another interesting thing about the Abbot to talk about our other AI is that, he was basically Greta, except less smart, I think, and less ambitious. And so he chose becoming an AI and then just decided he was going to stick around, run the school, and torture all the other children exactly the way that he was tortured. Or possibly torture the other children in different ways and tell himself that this is necessary because it's still better than what he went through.
No, it's textually the second one. It's implied that the whole austere agrarian, we only eat what we cook and all of that stuff, that only came in under him.
Right.
He put that in place, which is, and that was his attempt to improve things, or basically his attempt to impart moral education to the children of the leadership of the world by making them milk goats and, harvest pumpkins.
Yeah, so that much is as textually unique to him. How much of the collective punishment and electric shocks and brainwashing, like nightmare brainwashing, was stuff that happened to him, and how much of it is stuff that he has decided was better than what happened to him. So clearly this is, the lesser evil, and he's actually a good guy. It's implied that at least some of that is going on, but, the book does not come down clearly on it.
I would have liked him to do a little bit more reckoning with his, self-justification, maybe, on the verge of his death.
He's maybe... like, it's clear to me that the dying was he took the easy way out.
Yes. Maybe that's a lot to ask. But, his moment is, okay, I'm going to help you, I'm going to help you do the dangerous thing, but it doesn't really even contradict, what he's been doing with them so far. It's just more use of them as tools. Yeah,
well, and again, I'm not sure that isn't deliberate because, he's been grooming Greta to become the next AI ruler of the school for much of her childhood and adolescence. And despite the fact that this is an incredibly painful, often deadly procedure, and then it happens to her, and it's awful. Like, one of the things that I do appreciate about this book is that getting turned into an AI is awful. It is an awful process when it happens, and it is an awful process after it happens. And it's not 100% clear that this is actually a living person, and that this is still Greta.
Yes. I think when I say I would have liked it if, in this case, I'm not saying I think the book should have done that. It's more like,
I would have liked it if within the reality of this book, I wanted him to suffer more.
Yeah, which is an indication of how much I was captured by the book.
Right, no, and absolutely, thing. Like I wanted, I would have loved to see Greta confront the Abbot and, post AIing and be like, I cannot believe that you're doing this. There
are only two actual things about the book that I thought could have, that I would have changed from a structural standpoint. One of which is that it's when you do the you're trapping the hero in a nightmare that they can't wake up, and when they wake up they're still in the nightmare thing, which is what the dream torture does. That's not good to put in the middle of your book. Because that puts the shoe over, is she going to wake up again? Shoe, hovering over the entire rest of the narrative.
Well, I think it's pretty clear that she's going to wake up again because this is a torture that is regularly done to the children.
Well, I meant like how much of the plot are we going to get into before we discover that it's all a dream? And it turns out that it's not, in fact, all the rest of the book is real life and she is awake. But, it creates that question in your brain. And part of me is still thinking like, am I a sucker that I'm buying into this? What if we're still in the nightmare mode?
Oh, that hadn't even occurred to me. I would have been so mad.
Well, I mean, it's certainly good that they didn't do that. But,
yeah, no. For me, the book did a pretty good job of presenting this as a routine torture that's regularly done to the kids. And so I was like, oh, well, Greta goes into this believing that she's going to come out of it because clearly this has happened to her before, though not since she was little, because she's actually, very good at complying with, like, figuring out rule systems and complying with them. But, she treats this so much as a routine punishment that it didn't even occur to me that like the author could have pulled that, but that would have been so awful. And if it had occurred to me, I would have been really stressed out and annoyed about it.
Well, there you go. It did occur to me, and I was like, how long before I can be pretty sure that that's not happening,
Yeah.
And then by the time we get to the rest of the book, then I was pretty sure. But that particular trope has sets off mind goblins in me.
Yeah, that's fair.
And the other one I already discussed is that I wish that we'd had a little bit more time with post upload Greta to get into more of that and to feel a little bit less.
Yeah, because it was definitely rushed. I mean, I think part of the sort of she's gone from being an autistic character to a caricature of an autistic character as soon as she becomes a robot. I think that if they'd spent a little bit more time and let her process happen a little bit more slowly, or had her, it was so compressed that I think that the author didn't give herself space to be a little bit more subtle and interesting about it.
Yes.
So one thing I got to give this book props for is that so there's the whole discourse around YA, around like YA of this era, of sort of the late aughts and early teens of, oh, well, it has to have a love triangle. And, and then everybody goes, well, the point, this is stupid. These love triangles are stupid. They should, either the girl should just say no to both of them, and, go off and live her own life, or she, say yes and be poly. And this gives us both. This gives us, she could have basically her maybe boyfriend, maybe just weird friend and her hot girlfriend, and they're both into that and totally willing to go along. And then it says, no, actually, she's going to reject the entire, opportunity for romance, and she's going to die. She's going to lose her body in a year or two, and she's going to go off. And they support this because she has some chance of affecting political change.
Yeah, no, it handled that pretty deftly. Like when I was in an early note here is like when Alien first shows up and is being Alien, and they're having their excuse me princess, sort of Han Solo reactions to each other. I was like, boy, if I didn't know what the name of our podcast was, I would think that this was the major romance in this book.
Right. I went through most of the book thinking this was the major romance. Even like after she had kissed Dasha, I was still like, I don't know. It's still like really selling us on this classic YA romance. It's not until she tells it's not until Talus is giving her shit for like being into Eliane, and she's like, actually, I'm pretty sure I'm falling in love with my roommate. And then he goes, hot Asian roommate, huh? Kinky. And we collectively want to punch him.
We collectively roll our eyes, yes, because he was so born in 1973.
Right. And Greta's just like, I don't understand where you're going with this, but you're being awful.
Yes. You have to forgive all of the body talk. He's from an older generation.
Right. But this is also just a comment on the era of that it wasn't until that moment quite late in the book that I was like, oh wow, no, it's actually going for it.
Yes, and as you point out, like it isn't even, there's option A and option B or option C here. It's like, I'm 16, I don't know what the fuck is happening, and my life is under threat, and maybe something is going to happen that is way more important than any of this, and that forces me to go off to the mountains to learn to be a artificial intelligence,
Right.
which is like option H, but I think is far more realistic under the circumstances.
Yes. So like, props to this book for having the courage of its dystopia, and not, giving its like there's no coming back for Greta. Her body is dying now.
Yes. I want to like highlight, I was like, oh my God, that's such a good line that it must be a quote or an allusion to something. But when she and Dacia are finally getting it on, and she thinks to herself, all these years I read Greek and missed this.
Yes.
I was like, that feels like it's from some 19th century novel or something.
It does.
I was like, oh, that's so good.
It's so good and so in character for Greta, who kind of talks like she's in a 19th century novel because, she really does kind of want to be a British boarding school protagonist with, with all the reading of the classics and...
Yes. And I love the fact that there's plot reasons for her symbolic haircut. Speaking of being a princess and then being a lesbian.
Yes. I do love a plot justified.
The word that went missing in the edit was haircut, and if I had to guess, Alexis might have been thinking of Miyazaki, who always figures out a way for his heroine to get the same haircut by the end of the film, because it's his favorite one to animate, I guess. Anyway, it happened for plot reasons this time. Yeah, and how Dasha is immediately like hubba hubba.
Right. Actually, that's a great moment. Is that they cut? She has to cut off all of her beautiful long "I'm the whitest girl in the world" hair, and
right.
Eliana's like, "Oh, your hair," and Dasha's like, "Ooh."
The audiobook gives Greta's mother like an Irish accent, incidentally. And you can sort of imagine her being like, playing a giant harp. And so there's definitely that tension in there.
Yes. Okay, so I am going to complain now about the handling of Lidesha. First of all, because it, again, her name is written in pinyin. That works as a, as a Chinese name, though who knows what the characters are. But apparently, not only does the audiobook apparently pronounce it Dazia, but the author clearly thinks that it is pronounced Dazia because her name is written in pinyin. Her nickname is written in pinyin as Xie, but it is pronounced Z. And this drove me crazy because every single time I would read it as Xie, and then somebody would make a joke like, haha, where you're from, it's probably pronounced Zed.
Yeah. No, that feels like such an obvious thing to check.
Right, like, this book is old, but it's not that old.
Right, come on now.
And, and in general, like, I think she did not get as much humanizing as I think she deserved. Like, she's delightful, she gets all the good quips. Her, yes, I have a dynastic marriage, but in the meantime, I have eyes. But like she's still very much, I'm 6 different Oriental tropes shoved into one cute bisexual girl.
Yeah, she's sort of like, I would sort of, she's going to be a nominee for best love interest at the end of the year just because of how like, weirdly perfect she is, but it is absolutely like, it is in fact my hot Asian roommate. Thanks for pointing it out, Talus.
Right.
That is the trope that we're working with here. Speaking of spelling, how is Talus spelled?
Talus is spelled Talis. His original name was Michael Telos, I believe, Telos.
Okay, so that's interesting. I was thinking about that because, speaking of like weird synchronicities or inspirations, there's a game called the Talus Principle, which is about humans who have been uploaded into immortal AI bodies after the end of the world. and that's TALOS.
Huh, when was that? When did that game come out?
Relatively recently. It's actually quite good because all of these AIs are dormant and are trapped forever in a 90s internet forum with each other, basically.
Huh. It almost makes me wonder if that's I mean, they could also just be recognizing, they could be referencing the same thing, like telos is what gives us teleology.
Yes, exactly.
But,
although it made me think of Thomas Tallis, the medieval musician, but that is probably not what is being referenced here.
Probably not.
Here's little Thomas Tallis.
Why fumed inside the Gentiles fight in fury raging stout? Why take thin hand the people fond vain things to bring about?
Sorry about that, Alexis. At least it mentions Gentiles.
So I have a question for you. Given your own upbringing, what did you think of the Roadrunner metaphor and its use in Greta's AI experience?
I mean, I grew up in a Warner Brothers household. My dad imparted many, important things to me via, Looney Tunes. It felt familiar, but in a sort of, okay, yes, this is who this person is kind of a way. This is
who this person is. The question is, though, were you sold on the various moments where he tries to make it emotionally meaningful?
Yes, I think that Warner Brothers cartoons can be emotionally meaningful. They did whatever happened to R. Crumb, after all.
That's fair. I'm not saying that Warner Brothers cartoons can't be emotionally meaningful or have emotional resonance for kids who grew up in it. What I'm mostly saying is that, when she's skinning, when her AI layers are coming apart, and she's, and then she's like, no, I can't do the Roadrunner thing and look down. And he's like, no, you can fly. Did that work for you? Because it actually worked for me, but I don't have as much emotional resonance with, it worked for me as actually this guy has been making glib references the entire time and now he's forced to care. And he's still stuck with the metaphors of his glib reference.
It's sort of it's sort of about who he is. He's younger than my dad. Just to put that on the table.
He's possibly your age,
references
given...
No, he's older than me. I'm almost certain of it. But
he could also be somebody our age who's just really into old stuff, though.
It's true. I think that he would have more shame about all of the Star Wars and Star Trek stuff if he was our age.
I have met people.
That's true. Who knows how old he was when he got uploaded also, but I think that would make a significant difference in his attitude. But regardless, I think that it worked for me, and one of the reasons that it worked for me is that I personally believe that the Chuck Jones, Coyote, and Roadrunner cartoons are immortal works of art, and I'm saying that non-ironically.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
So, I think that it's a perfectly reasonable reference to choose from, even in moments of it's not cheese, it's something that transcends that. So in an emotional moment, why not?
Cool. That was because, it worked for me, though more on a sort of, can you imagine you're in a moment of emotional crisis and you're stuck dealing with a teenager who's making Roadrunner references and has never even seen the cartoon, and this is your fault because you've been so glib and self-referential, and teehee, this is very funny to me, even as I'm pretending that it's ancient wisdom. So
I think that the person who Tallis is very clearly capable of the ironic sincerity jutsu that people of my generation and Gen X were steeped in.
Yes, I think so too.
And that this is very clear in his utterances.
Yes. But also at the same time, I think, it is interesting watching him actually have to care about a thing. Because
yes, it is.
Because he stops making nearly so many references, but Greta is still making the references because she knows that they are important and she doesn't know the context.
That's true. She doesn't know it's a cartoon.
Right.
That hadn't fully sunk in.
Right.
That's actually really
she grows
good.
up without television, basically, and she's getting ready to, she's just become an AI, and he's like walking her through, and he's super excited because, basically this is a new family member, from a shrinking family, and he's been really lonely, and she's like, I'm a roadrunner.
I wonder what she's picturing.
Right?
Does she does she know the animal? I mean, it doesn't occur in Saskatchewan.
Right, exactly.
I think before we end, we're getting close.
Yeah.
The one thing that I wanted to talk about that we haven't talked about is Tolliver Burr.
Oh yeah. So speaking of people who possibly get off too lightly.
I mean, that felt like there's going to be a sequel,
I don't think anything happens to him in the sequel. I think what happens to him is he gets lost in the wilderness of Saskatchewan and he dies of hunger and thirst.
Well, in that case, great. I mean, I think that's a perfectly reasonable end for him. Probably crueler than anything that they could have done to him in.
Yeah, I think that's why Talus agrees to let him go.
Right. But again, I really don't. I feel like I've come off like I want this book to, to mete out moral punishment to evil characters, which is not what I believe in the slightest. It
would be satisfying if.
Right, exactly. And that's her moment to to be like, well, I'm not like you. I'm not going to torture you to death. I'm simply going to let you starve to death in the wilderness, which is a little weird. But.
Well, I mean, this is a teenager who was just tortured and is not necessarily making like smart decisions.
Yeah, no, I don't expect actually another great thing about the book is like it's very good at how traumatized and like not thinking clearly all of the characters are for most of this book. But I'm mostly thinking about the sort of like, I think he's a really good creepy psycho villain.
Mm-hmm.
Which is tough to pull off. He's kind of jokery, but not cool.
Yeah.
Which is important. It's very easy to make your sort of Joker psycho characters cool.
Yeah, he's super not cool.
He's super not. I think that the reason that they keep saying his name over and over again is that it's a dorky name.
Uh-huh.
And we want to be reminded that he's a dork.
I do. I like the way that he's unrolled as a character where first he's sort of he's just the dorky comms guy, and he keeps wanting to be called by his first name, and the kids keep not doing it because, they're keeping some distance. And then he's like, oh no, I'm not just the comms guy, I'm also the torturer. Because, torture is propaganda. This is publicly filmed, broadcasted torture. It's propaganda. This is this is just part of my job. And you go, oh, that's why he's been trying to get all the kids to call him by his first name. He's been trying to build some sort of creepy emotional rapport, but these kids are all so abused that it doesn't work.
Yeah. I was a little worried about when he goes through the, the whole like, fashion photographer, smile for the camera stuff, that he's meant to be a little gay coded, but I don't really think that, is true. I think he's just weird.
Yeah.
I feel like we don't quite give Tolliver Burr his due here. The secret to his character may be that because practically everybody in the story is autistic in one way or another, and the true horror is a guy who's actually a manipulator and a liar, specifically a liar. Talus takes a very straightforward, honest approach to his role as global dictator and is therefore more sympathetic to our hero than a guy who just, says nice things to you and hurts you at the same time. I think that, but yeah, no, that's a very good point about him trying to, create that creepy rapport and, not realizing that he's stuck, that he's, what he's dealing with. I also, thank you 2015. I like the fact that the torture does not achieve its stated strategic ends here.
Nope.
As it mostly doesn't.
Speaking of people who get off lightly, though again, I think this makes sense in the, Greta's willingness to forgive her mother for being like, Greta goes in being like, you can torture me, and she's shaking and she's horrified and she's terrified, etc. But she's also, part of why she's so terrified is that she does not believe that her mother is going to make the concessions and stop the torture. And indeed, her mother does not.
Mm-hmm. As you say, it's not I think the reason that their conversation goes as smoothly as it does afterwards is that this isn't it isn't a revelation or a betrayal. It's like this was table stakes for that relationship.
Yeah.
They are, the fact that she's here at all means that her mother is willing to let her die.
And that she's well aware of it.
Yeah.
Like also, she doesn't rush to tell her mother the good news of, oh, I'm going to become an AI. Like, she does tell her mother, but she takes care of all of her actual emotionally important relationships first. And then her mother's having all these emotions about my baby, and she's like, oh, no, actually, I'm going to be an AI. Sorry, I just, like, left you on red all day.
I think that there is something to be said here about how, whether you want it to or not, outsized power and wealth does interfere with your ability to make strong personal relationships. Simply, as a first principles sort of results of the fact that there's always going to be, all this ulterior baggage, in everything that you interact with, even if it's your own family.
Yeah, I think it's a good point.
But, heavy lies the head and all that.
Yeah. Well, and sort of the same thing is happening to Talus. I mean, it's partly because of his immortality. But, like, everyone who's important to him at this point are the other AIs, and they keep dying.
Indeed. He gets older, but the teenage hostages are always the same age.
Exactly.
But yes, it is interesting how, like, I like all the stuff about how the abbot's aging is, like, obviously optional. Like, the way that he acts like an old man can be turned on and off.
Yes.
At least before the
and he never became an old man. Like, he must, because this happened to him as a hostage child. So the abbot, for all that he acts like an old man, like, stopped aging at 17 at the absolute latest. That was a 17-year-old boy who got turned into an AI.
And so his acting old is basically him announcing to the world that he is sick of being alive.
Right.
And he does in fact get to sneak off into oblivion while Talus is distracted.
Yep. Interesting book. Coincidentally, a book that I finished reading at this last time I saw my mother alive.
Well, I think it's a good episode, and I do encourage people who are, like, just interested in wizards versus lesbians as a genre, who aren't, if that's anybody but us, to check this out as a sort of early but very mainline and on the nose example of the micro genre.
Yeah, it's a really good example of you can see all the sort of those currents coming together.
Indeed. But it is definitely time to wrap up. Yep. So I will. I'm not going to say what we're doing next time because I've given up on that. we keep changing our minds. I keep changing my mind. I will just say that it's funny that we've chosen to kick off our second season of we're going to broaden our horizons a lot by reading mainline Wizlets.
Yes, well.
Things just happen.
Also, thank you very much to the person who recommended it, because even though I read this book a while ago, I couldn't remember it well enough to be sure that Isaac would be willing to read it. So thanks, person who suggested to kick it up on the list.
Indeed. And until next time, whatever next time is.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Little Joanna Newsom here. Do you know what this is, son? This is the Panopticon. And all around us blink the brash and shifty eyes of common cash. So do we die or do we travel down the path by which one dabbles in the arts of antediluvian crafts with yarn and glue? So gather twilight to your breast and couch the rabble-rouser's nest. And we will take a day of rest, and we will all be heaven blessed. And we will gather round to dine and pass the time with wicked rhymes and toast in dandelion wines to hear their mellifluous chimes. We toast the fallow furrows that we sow, and we toast the monies that we owe. And we toast the creditors we daily face who topple down with gruesome grace. And we toast the aristocrats with blood of blue, 'cause we know that our collars are that color too. And we toast the artisans of antediluvian crafts with yarn and glue. We do, we do.